As I turn your attention, as I must first today, to the welfare bill that Keir Starmer is going to struggle to get through the House of Commons today, I wonder how many of the facts you are already across. So, if we go back to 2019, there were about 3 million working age adults, and that is people aged between 16 and 64, on either disability or incapacity benefit. Fast forward to March of 2025, and that figure had grown to about 4 million. So that's 1 in 10 of working age adults in this country who are in receipt of either disability or incapacity benefit. And tempting though it is to conclude that there has been an explosion in mental and behavioural disorders, that's the title of the category, it accounts for 44% of all claims, but back in 2015, it accounted for 39%. So, it's gone up, but it hasn't come close to doubling or anything like that. I don't think it even counts as exponential. It's a steep rise, but it's not an explosion. It's not a game changer. Another story to which I think I need to draw your attention before we continue is a report from May of last year that there are almost zero recorded losses to the taxpayer due to actual fraud in the disability benefits system. Personal independence payment fraud stood at 0% in the financial year ending 2024. Disability living allowance fraud was 0.1%, which all statisticians would round down to £0 million. And yet this concept, this narrative of a sick-note culture and an insistence that we need to crack down on fraud seems to me to define and determine almost all of the discourse on this issue. And it's really confusing sometimes. How many times do I have to tell you that it's much better to be confused than it is to be certain? If you're certain of an opinion that you haven't thought about or that you've built without, for example, some of the facts I've just shared with you, some of the evidence, some of the statistics, some of the detail, then your opinion is worthless. Listen, I know we currently live in a country, since the Brexit referendum, we lived in a country where opinions based on nothing are afforded, if anything, even more weight than opinions based on facts and evidence and expertise. But the pendulum will swing back one day. It has to. It has to. The truth will out. And this seems to me to be another one of those stories. PIP overpayments stood at 0.4%, which is about £90 million lost in a year, a drop, if you like, in the ocean, and down about £110 million on the previous year. So even on that one, the direction of traffic was very positive. So there are two, quotes, problems, end quotes here, okay? The first is that loads of people are currently signed off work or in receipt of disability payments. 1 in 10. Well, that's the first question. That figure strikes me as staggering. But it might not strike you as staggering. I've got one more statistic for you in a moment. And the second one is this widespread perception, and this is the one that splits into two, a widespread perception that a lot of people on these benefits do not have to be on them. Now, whether you're buying into the narrative of fraud and exaggeration, or whether you are, as Keir Starmer is trying to do, selling the notion that with the right help and support, a lot of people currently in receipt of these benefits, a lot of people currently not working who want to work, could actually be helped back into work. Those could be true at the same time. My instincts and my evidence tells me that the second category, the people who want to work but don't live in a country that accommodates their needs and disabilities, is a much bigger issue here than the people who will somehow go running to work if they are hungry enough or if their lifestyle is sufficiently diminished. But both could be true at the same time. Both could be true at the same time. The problem is that none of us know. You know? None of us know. The story of the anecdote about somebody somewhere claiming something they don't need is interesting, right? But it should not be used to define an entire constituency of people, in this case 4 million people. So the sense that because you know someone who knows someone who knows someone who's swinging the lead on this issue means that you don't trust the figures, that 4 million must be absolutely bogus. 1 in 10 just seems too high. So I don't think there's anything cruel or callous or large C conservative about saying we've got to get that number down. I wonder if that's the phone-in question this morning. Is it callous simply to say we've got to get that number down? Because the other statistic that always surprises me, I've touched on it with that massive increase between 2019 and 2025, but we came out of the back of the pandemic and things ballooned. Things went up by a lot. And I think we overlooked the possibility that the virus has, I don't want to use a rude word here, but I'm sure you can imagine which one I would if I did. The virus has really messed us up. I now get 5 texts saying it wasn't the virus, it was the vaccine. But hey-ho, that's the price of free speech, isn't it? The virus has really messed us up. I hate anecdotes because I'm getting older, which means that people I know getting ill is a consequence of my age, not of the fact that we're coming out of the back of the pandemic. But if you think about the isolation that was imposed upon our young people, many of whom have moved from school age to working age in the interim, and you think about the long-term impacts of long COVID, which is now recognised, but if everybody who's got it has been diagnosed, then I will eat my headphones this morning. And the possibility, missing from all of this conversation, all of this debate, the possibility that we are much, much sicker post-pandemic than we were before. But how the heck do you have a phone in about that? You know I love you. I love you deeply, but caller after caller after caller detailing their own medical conditions is unhelpful in the context of trying to come to a better understanding of the bigger issues. There is the simple question of how we know, how we tell the difference. For example, the fact that, as I've just explained to you, the increase in mental health and behavioural disorders has been from 39% in 2015 to 44% of all claims in 2024. So it hasn't rocketed. It hasn't gone up particularly exponentially. It's definitely gone up. And if that is completely unlinked to the impacts of lockdowns and viruses, then again, I will eat my headphones. Although, listen, it goes over some people's head. Here's Dave H. James getting the wrong end of the stick again. It's not recorded fraud that's important. It's those that are claiming to have mental health issues, etc., which are so hard to prove or disprove. 50% don't want to work. Claimants have a right to be believed and for notes verified, But the numbers have only gone up by 5% in 6 years. And if that isn't in large part a consequence of the impacts of lockdown, particularly on younger people, who have, I don't know whether agoraphobia is the correct diagnosis, but the number of young people who find what you and I consider to be normality imponderable is huge. And that, for me, and again, this is based on what you've told me, that for me is again probably a large part of economic inactivity, which remains one of the big mysteries of our time. The number of very young people, 16 to 24, not 16 to 64, who operate in a sort of economic limbo, still dependent on their parents, in some cases, but not all, still receiving welfare, because the relationship with work that we were brought up to believe was baked into our society has been broken. You tell kids they can stay at home for months during their most formative years. Then when they reach school leaving age, they are not equipped in many cases. And of course, the poorer they are and the worse their home life, and the more likely they are to be deprived or coming from dysfunctional families, the more likely they are not to have been helped into a place where they can get up and go to work. So what's the phone in, man? We can't do it, can we? The COVID question, whether or not that is going to be a large part of this, and Keir Starmer appears to me to be ignoring it. You can't deal with the weirdos claiming that everybody's a liar. That dreadful organisation, the Taxpayers Alliance, is pumping stories into newspapers again about, I think, 5 people on PIP claiming it because of acne, and that apparently is proof that they're all fraudsters. If 5 people in the country have got acne so absolutely vicious that it pushes them towards something like agoraphobia, then I'm perfectly comfortable to recognise that they're going to need help that people who do not have life-crippling acne are not going to need. But this desire from the right, and it's always the right, to create the notion that vulnerability is fraud is hideous. So that's the Scylla and Charybdis for me. 1 in 10 seems so high. It seems too high. 1 in 10 adults of working age on a disability benefit seems to me to be too high. Maybe it isn't. You tell me. It doesn't seem to me to be cruel or callous or corrupt to claim. It's quite pleasingly alliterative, wasn't it? Cruel or callous or corrupt to claim that number can be reduced, and the only organs that can reduce it are organs of government, government institutions. So, I will ask you this, and I know it plays into the negative narrative slightly, but how would you? Well, no, let me tell you. I'll ask you the compassionate question first. What help would you need to go to work? So you're currently in receipt of, lots of people in receipt of PIP, of course, are already in work. What help would you need? What plausible help would you need from the state? I'm a big fan of the state. Everybody who understands anything and is not super rich is a big fan of the state. It's like that old line about the only people who wouldn't be fans of the state are billionaires and idiots. And if you want to find out which one you are, just check your bank balance, okay? So what help would you need? And keep it clear, if you can, to go back to work. Because huge parts of this proposal, this bill, involve things like work coaches in GP surgeries, addressing the issue. And again, I worry that what are these jobs that are empty that people aren't doing? But again, you know that with the right help, you could work more, whether you're going from 0 to X hours or whether you're going from X hours to Y hours. What help would you need? What help would you need to work more? 0345 6060 973, because the government have absolutely blown this. They've absolutely muffed it up because they're not having this conversation. It might not be their fault. It might be the lens of right-wing media once again distorting reality, but we're not part of the right-wing media, you and me. And yet we feel the discourse has been defined by savings and cruelty and costs and pushing people into poverty, when in fact what the bill is designed to do is help people who want to work. So what help would you need? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Second question, and I don't like asking this, but if we are going to accept the narrative that lots of people are languishing on these benefits, lots of people could work but won't work. So the two crucially different categories, not working but want to work, need the right help, and then not working and don't want to work and possibly don't need the benefits that you. How do you tell the difference? 0345 6060 973. I don't think you can answer that question, but I'm going to encourage you to try. So what help would you need? And how do you tell the difference between people who want and need help to work more and people who fit the Daily Mail, the Rupert Murdoch, the LBC caller historically's conviction that they're all swinging the lead and they're all lying or exaggerating or embellishing and choosing to live lives of indolence and indulgence upon the taxpayer's shilling? How do you tell the difference, particularly, of course, in the context of invisible conditions? Help me out with this one. I think it's important to have honest and open, evidence-based conversations when the rest of the world is going to run at breakneck speed in the opposite direction. It's 10:20.